Pharma Careers event that is being conducted with the Harvard School of Public Health and the Harvard Medical School, with the organization kind of overseeing it being American Muslim Health Professionals that some of you may be familiar with. So my name is Sana Sayed. I am a neurologist here in Boston. In my day job, I work at Sanofi in neurology clinical development, late phase 2 to 3 mostly, and new drug approval. Other than that, the reason that I coordinated this is because I am the president for American Muslim Health Professionals, which is a public health organization that does professional development, mental health activities, and also policy and health policy and advocacy. We are a nonprofit. And I am also on the alumni board for the Harvard School of Public Health as a council person, and also on the Boston chapter for the Harvard School of Public Health. I am the VP for Professional Development. Hence, bringing together these different worlds for a mutual cause of professional development for those folks that might be interested in a career in pharmaceuticals. We have done other events on different career paths as well. I do a chai and chat series, and we'll see in the future if with the School of Public Health and the medical school there are further opportunities on a similar wavelength. So just to orient you to the event today, there are different tables with different labels listed. They just represent the specialties that may or may not be of interest for you. There are folks with a name tag with a golden border. Those are advisors that I collated from different departments. We have preclinical R&D, we have clinical development, which is myself as well. We have commercial, and we also have digital and AI, which is one of the speakers as well, and medical affairs. If I missed anything, you can read the labels and you'll find. There's obviously a lot more departments in a pharmaceutical industry, but you know, it's impossible to get everyone together under one roof on a weekend, on a Sunday. But a lot of us are connected to different people, so there can always be a means of a secondary introduction as well. The panel discussion is going to be based off of career paths and how different people with different backgrounds came to be in the pharmaceutical industry. I made an effort to bring diversity to the panel, and I don't mean the diversity that is now banned in the US. I mean diversity of specialties. I mean diversity of backgrounds in terms of education, and the other diversity that you see is just you know, a natural product of the people that I know and the people that are accomplished enough to be in the positions that they are. So it's definitely not illegal. So with that, I will start the panel discussion itself, and I will give you an opportunity to hear from the panelists, and I will also discuss how my own journey as well with the panelists as well. And with that, let me stop, and maybe Salma, you can kick it off by introducing.
Hi everyone, I'm Salma Bounas. I'm originally French. I moved to the US a year ago, and I'm a biologist by training. I've also done another master in a business school to go towards the commercial roles that I've had since then. And I'm today a global lifecycle management lead on a commercial team for a drug in development into phase 2.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Karen Lynch. I'm a physician, neurologist by training. I'm from Ireland originally. Trained there, medical school there, did some work, practiced there for a while, and then came here for residency. I was almost 10 years in an attending position as a neurologist, and then just recently moved into the pharmaceutical industry, and I work in medical.
Hello everyone, pleasure to meet you all. Name's Imtiaz Hussain. I guess you could call me a townie. Born and raised in Cambridge, so I've never left. I've been in the pharmaceutical industry for about 10 years now, spanning actually since college. So I've been here for quite a bit. Went through a couple of different companies, both small biotech and large pharma. Right now I'm the Associate Director of Data Science for both medical and commercial, so living both sides of the coin here, but pleasure to be here.
Imtiaz, you have an MPH, right?
Yes, I have an MPH from Tufts.
All right, so just to start the conversation, I think folks here would be very interested to know about more details of your career journey and how you ended up here in your current position, and a little more about the details that we may have glossed over. So maybe Imtiaz, let's start from that corner this time.
Sure. Let's see, where do I start? So I actually, I was explaining to my table over there, stumbled upon this role almost by accident, and almost this career path by accident. I was a researcher, right, straight out of college, and so I actually started in biology labs. Full researcher, and I realized it actually wasn't for me. Did college, learned all the biology you could, did terribly in chemistry, so I was not right for the pre-med path. But I realized I actually had a cool desire to want to find insights, and that obviously is super generic. But I decided that maybe an MPH might be the next career path for me, because I love public health, I love healthcare, and so I wanted to really get into that space a little bit more. And lo and behold, I loved biostatistics, I loved analytics, and so through that MPH, I gained a couple of skill sets in the data science world. And actually, my first role in pharma, believe it or not, was in medical affairs and had nothing to do with data science. And this is actually one point I want to make, that pharma is sometimes very daunting for a lot of people who have never been in pharma. And I know people, and especially myself, who, one, we didn't think we'd ever get into pharma, and two, we come from places where that's not actually what we do today at all, right? So I was actually in charge of but I was helping with medical affairs in terms of training materials. There's a lot of, in medical affairs, we have these people called medical science liaisons. They go out to the field and help educate and interact with physicians, like we have here today and here. And my job was to help train them on some of the products that the pharma company had and some of the therapeutic areas we were interested in. And lo and behold, there was a huge interest in analytics, and this was about 8 or 9 years ago at a small biotech company I used to work for. And here's something about pharma: we love outsourcing absolutely everything. We pay too much money to vendors to do our work for us. And part of a big chunk of medical affairs that they were interested in insights and analytics. And because of my MPH and having some level of analytical capability, was able to dive into more of an analytical-based role in medical affairs. Stayed there for about 5 years, grew a little bit, and then now it's been 5 years at Takeda. So I switched over to big pharma, and now doing not just medical affairs, but doing a lot of commercial work as well. And in between, I actually found that not a lot of people know about pharma too much. And so because of my MPH at Tufts and the things I learned at Tufts, I wish I learned more about pharma. I wish. Because I feel like pharma is sometimes painted as, this is the dark side, don't come to us, right? And so I decided to teach as an adjunct at Tufts Med for about 2 years, teaching 2 courses, one about Intro to AI and another on business of healthcare. Like, how does the financials work for the insurance world, the digital health world, digital therapeutics, which is a new upcoming industry, and pharma, obviously. So I've been in a lot of different places, but data science is really where my heart is. And part of my work is really dealing with this new big thing with generative AI and LLMs like ChatGPT and so on and so forth in the last 2 years, but also really the hardcore data science. How do we find insights, make models, and so on and so forth. So I'll stop talking because I've talked too much, but that's where I am now.
Yeah, so my journey is probably a little simpler, maybe, because it's just relatively fresh, and so hopefully this will give good perspective. But I mentioned I'm a physician by training, and essentially up until 18 months ago was in full-time practice as a neurologist, busy practice. But I always was intrigued by pharma. I had been doing some work with pharma in terms of speaking engagements, training of physicians or allied health professionals. I did a lot of chemodenervation. I don't know if you know that, but it's injecting toxins, and I would do a lot of training. So I had a good visibility into what pharma were doing. We were also just personally with my family, we were at the juncture too of, and I think this is important, where in terms of work-life balance, the grind of clinical practice can get challenging, especially if you have on-call responsibilities, sometimes unpredictable hours. So I'd been in practice, as I mentioned, 10 years almost as an attending, and then before that in Ireland, and then residency, and then fellowship, and I felt, you know what, I'm kind of getting to where what more is there? So through discussions with friends, colleagues, networking, I got to research a little bit more about pharma, and like has been mentioned, there isn't a lot of discussion about pharma when you're in medicine, which is really quite a shame. But the way I was drawn to medical, and when just to explain what medical is, medical or medical affairs is one of the 3 strategic pillars of the pharmaceutical industry. You have medical, R&D, and development, and commercial, in those 3 general buckets. And medical, particularly in neurology, is becoming a much more visible and important aspect of the pharma juggernaut. Essentially, now that, and again I was seeing in practice, now that we're dealing with a lot more chronic illnesses, people living for longer with diseases we can't cure, much more complexity to the science and the innovation and new medicines, there is a big need for good clinicians, people who have a lot of medical expertise, to work with pharma so that we're translating what the medicines are for the physicians, for the clinicians, so that ultimately patients can get the right medicine. And that really drew me in, and when I started to kind of decompress it all. Medical affairs to me, which can be often a natural first step for clinicians or those that have been maybe treating patients. It's a nice role in pharma. It's the closest you can be to your peers, meaning clinicians, to patients, and you straddle that role of being that liaison between R&D, communications, commercial, marketing, and succinctly using your expertise so that ultimately you're getting the right message to the clinicians, to the patients, so that they can all access medicines. And that was my move. I still really love seeing patients, and some clinicians who move into pharma will not see patients anymore, or decide, I'm 100% going to move in this direction. But for me, I really enjoyed it. It wasn't like I was burned out. We sometimes come across that. So most pharmaceutical companies really value that. If you're able to keep grounded, see patients, within the realm of what you can manage, there's a lot of support for that. So that has been nice too, to see that I can sort of keep that aspect of fulfillment in the job.
And so for myself, I see some similarities because between countries, when I went into biology, I really wanted to do research. That was my first objective. And it's so difficult to get funds and attractiveness around that specialty today that a lot actually within the people that I know have been going to different industries outside of only research. So that was only maybe by chance at that time, because it was a bit more than 10 years ago, that I learned that we could do some kind of business masters to get into pharma at one means, because at that time as well, a lot of the people that would actually go into medical, commercial, or clinicians or PharmD, so they opened up a bit more around double knowledge, and having this biology and business background was quite valuable for them. So I started mostly in brand leads positions with really mature products that were in the market for like 15 years with generics and so on, and launching products on the other hand were like very innovative in immunology. And for the past year and a half, I really wanted to go, because marketing and brand lead is very business. So you're looking at like market share, and you're trying to invest as much as possible for visibility and trying to provide the most important information to the physician, of course, but also like position your product as much as possible. So I really wanted to go into more like closer to clinical, and we do have those functions where you have you have firstly new product planning that is also commercial, but would look into like M1, M2 development and going into like proof of concept and then phase 2. And then you have some opportunities within products that are that already have, especially in immunology, that already have some indications, and then they expand given the mechanism of action and the potential. And I got into that space that way because my product today is in phase 3 for one indication, but we have a lifecycle management for 5 additional indications where we are only in phase 2 and waiting for results still. But it's super interesting because you get closeness to the medical clinical side, and we're trying to understand what's the need, what's the competitive environment, and where you would be providing value. The value, of course, is very important because we have commercial, we also have market access that is looking into pricing and how can we bring the right value for each of our products. And you also have like this, so you have this closeness to clinical and the commercial side where you're trying to create a story, which I really enjoy as well, because when you know that you're bringing something new and in a market where you don't have much to patients, then you really want to have the right story so you can convince HCPs to actually prescribe something that is pretty new, where they don't have anything that they can rely on. When you look at different attributes for a product, of course, safety is very important, but a lot around efficacy and the risk that they're willing to take for their patient is also something that we need to convey. So yeah, that's mostly my...
Thank you. Thank you, guys. So let me speak a little bit about myself and the function that I am in. So I am in clinical development. Since I'm a neurologist, I stuck with neurology clinical development. I did my MD actually in Pakistan, and then I came here by way of Kuwait. That's where I used to live. And I did residency here in the Boston area. I also ended up doing 2 fellowships in MS and cognitive neurology in the Longwood area. And at the same time, I was doing a master's right here in this building. So some might say that I was a little confused, but that's now how I visualized myself. Then I realized after while I was doing these trainings and the fellowships and the masters, which I spent 2 years finishing all these 3 things up, that I could not do clinical work full time. I think unlike Karen, I might have been burned out. I was already thinking this day in, day out is not working for me. One of the reasons I will say is because as a neurologist, we diagnose a lot, but I felt like I wasn't making a difference. And I was doing a few clinical trials in my fellowship. Obviously, when you're doing clinical trials at a hospital, it's a little different. They give you the protocol, they give you everything, and they're telling you what to do. And I kept thinking, oh, what if I did it this way or that way? But I can't, right? I don't have that particular say, especially as a fellow. So I started wondering, I'm trying to tell them something. If I know so much more than them, I should try to actually get on that side. And I was doing a couple of clinical trial design courses at Harvard in my MPH as well at the time. I did biostatistics as well, and EPI. Unlike Imtiaz, I didn't fall in love with it, so you don't have to, just to be clear. So I did those types of things. I did a clinical trial design course as well. I found that very interesting. And then I started interviewing for my next job, and I kept interviewing academia, private practice. I applied for pharma jobs. I kid you not, I got rejected right off the bat from all of them. So then, because they kept encouraging me, oh, you should start somewhere else. You should start as like a medical science liaison. And there's no harm in doing that. But you know what? I did not want to. I wanted to be part of the research. I did not want to start there. I wanted to start in the research, in development, in trial design. And it's like, okay, I have to get there somehow. So since this is Boston, I will say it is a land of opportunities, specifically Boston. I don't know about the rest of the world, or the rest of the US, rather. I landed just by chance. I emailed the chair of neurology at Tufts, actually. He emailed me right away and told me that they have a collaboration with Pfizer. So overnight, I discovered this opportunity. What was happening was that Pfizer was funding an academic neurologist position in which the neurologist would see patients like 25% of the time at the hospital. That was in the form of a clinic, a couple of clinics a month, and then a few months of inpatient work. And the rest of the 75% of their time was spent at Pfizer, integrated into their system. They called it a clinical translational research fellowship. To my knowledge, it still exists. And that's where I met Nina, actually. She's sitting at the back. So I started that position. And the best thing about it, which may or may not work for some people, but it worked for me, since I was like, I was in discovery mode. So it was very unstructured. So they asked me. The guy running it was also, he was like very senior. He was a professor at BU and then somewhere else, and also a neurologist. But he had this mentorship academic kind of mindset. He's like, what do you want to do? So it's like, okay, this is perfect. So I told him I want to touch on clinical trial design. And the department was centered on digital health. So I was like, okay, I also like endpoint discovery. Maybe I can dabble in that. I met a few scientists, and I was like, oh, if you have data, even though I don't like statistics, rather I almost hated it, but I want to see if I learned anything. Who knows? So they gave me some data to play with in a software called Spotfire, which runs the numbers for you, so it's perfect, right? So I realized I don't really hate statistics that much. So what ended up happening is I kind of started discovering pharma in that way. And I was like, okay, which part do I like? Because there's another thing that you have to keep in mind. The idea of pharma is very attractive. Some people might even find it cool, depending on who you are. But doing it on a day-to-day job is different, right? So will you like that day-to-day? Because it's not about telling your friends, oh, I work here and there. It's about actually going in and being like, oh, this is good. I like this. Because what ends up happening, pharma, is a lot of meetings, and then a lot more meetings, and then a lot more meetings, and then you have to review a bunch of stuff, right? So, and then run some numbers if you're in Dallas. So it's kind of like that. So I discovered that I really liked it. They had unlimited, from my perspective, compared to academia, funding, and it was just like a Disneyland of science for me. And I felt like I was in the discovery space. Failure rates are high. I'm not glossing over that. But I like the fact that the effort is 100%. I did like that part. Now, I told you how I got rejected. Now, how the tables turned. Within 6 months, Pfizer offered me a job. And as an associate director in development, I was like, okay, this is very interesting. I started thinking about it. I made a pros cons list with the mentor I mentioned. And then I realized I like what I'm doing right now, because the 2 years, it was a 2-year program. The 2-year program gave me the gift of time. I could spend it discovering more. And just as a mental note to myself, since I value myself maybe a bit too much, I was like, you know what, they're giving me an associate director position now. Give it another year or so, and I will get a medical director position, which, by the way, is the exact same position, you just get paid more. So it's like, why not, right? Why sell yourself short? So I looked at it that way, and I was like, let me do that. So this time, I turned down Pfizer. So I kept going. It's not like they were going to kick me out, right? So they were fine with it. They understood my reasons. I made a lot of friends. I completed the 2 years to try to hire me again. I decided I wanted to do MS and not, general neurology or neuromuscular and rare disease, which is where they focused. Plus, I was lucky I did that. 6 months after I left, they shut down neuro. So they fired a bunch of people, basically. So I decided I was going to do MS. I went to a company called EMD Serrano, which is the European Merck KGaA based in Germany. I did get that medical director position I talked about, so I was right. So it does happen, you just have to market yourself properly. And since then, I spent a year or two there. Then I moved to Sanofi with some of my friends here. And over there, I am what they call a global clinical lead for a project. And I basically oversee a phase 3 and phase 2 program. I also am working currently on an approval process. And I have a team of medical directors and clinical scientists. And that is what I'm working on currently. I do like the clinical development space because, as I said, my mind was really into the research, the trial design, the fact that I feel like I am owning discovery. That were my reasons behind it. So that was basically my journey. I want to go back to my folks here and just find out a little bit about all of you did different types of degrees, and you also had different types of lived experiences. How do you bring that into your day-to-day job, and how do those skills feed into what you're doing in your current work? This time I'll start with Selma.
Maybe just one point from what you were saying. I think it's super interesting because you got the experience from the outside, but you can also, there's a lot of people who know they want to go into pharma because it's interesting and they want to be part of how can we make patients' lives better, not being a physician, and still having some kind of impact on it. And you can have an ambition on, for example, maybe going into marketing right away, but it's not a down step to maybe start by sales because they work very closely together, and you can learn a lot on how are you talking about those products directly to the physicians rather than creating a campaign that then the people are using. So I think there's different levels, which is super interesting, and you get to, I feel when you go into pharma, and I've only been in one company, and it's a big company, so you see a lot, which is I think a big difference with biotechs as well, where we can talk about it as well, but there is huge opportunities. I started on the French market, I went into global roles, then I went back to local and launched product, and then I'm back in global and I've moved countries. So within also pharma, I think they put a lot of emphasis on the risk that you're willing to take, moving countries, changing jobs, taking opportunities that maybe you didn't have the background or the studies for to begin with. I've seen people going from commercial to medical and not having a medical background on different types of products. I wouldn't say on launches and then very, very specified one, but in general medicine or any kind of those. So I think that's the pathways can be very different, but you're learning from what you do. That's mainly of because when I think back on my biology master's and my business degree, I've learned more in doing actually the different jobs rather than, so I value a lot of people that goes into fellowship, internships that are very, very willing of just trying and being part of the teams than the actual degree that they have got.
I think to address maybe the degree and lived experiences as a clinician, so of an MD, and with that additional training, residency and fellowship, and then practicing, there's a degree of expertise that I bring every day in terms of real world experience when you've treated a patient, when you know the unmet needs in that space, when you know what your colleagues are going through, the battles they might have with getting meds approved, what a payer, how payers understand things too, and kind of those barriers. That's significant insights for a company, for development too, when they're thinking about trials. Now, many will have clinicians that have come from a background, but again, there can be that cross-collaboration that can happen. Also, I think as part of maybe the journey through medical school, through residency fellowship, clinicians tend to be, we talked about this, smart, really willing to learn, continuously developing, really typically into education. And so medical affairs also is a nice role where I felt that component. Many of us in practice still continue to do some degree of teaching, whether it's from nurses, allied health professionals, and so forth. So that education piece and how you communicate is really key for medical affairs. We're often kind of the extrovert of the company because we're out there at congresses, we're meeting with key opinion leaders, putting together advisory sessions, and sort of that communication style can be very helpful. And I think other aspects perhaps are, I think for myself, I had very little industry experience going into it, and that's a whole nother journey about how do you even break in. But I think sometimes that roundedness with patient care can be attractive. Again, if you've met the right people, you've connected in the right way, and if somebody sees that in you in a company, that can mean an awful lot to these companies. As I said, in certain areas where there's very high unmet needs, like for example neurology or genetics, that lived experience that a clinician might have can be so much more impactful than the 3 to 5 years industry experience that you'll see on some of the advertisements. So all of that are things that I try to bring into the day-to-day, and again can make it quite appealing for organizations.
Maybe I bring a little bit of personality that I learned about myself and how that helped me figure out what I kind of want to do. So right after college, I was doing research at Brigham in the rheumatology department, and I was very much on the preclinical grind, if you will, doing research with mouse models, different types of arthritis, you name it. I thought this was going to be my life going forward, and I was partially okay with that. But I realized I started hating it. So I realized that over the last first few years of my career, I wanted to take what I wanted to trust my gut feeling. So the things that I learned about myself through those initial first few jobs really helped cater to what I actually wanted to do. And Pharma had kind of that spot for me, which I really appreciate. This is sometimes what I tell to my students, is like they can have a bazillion different interests. There is a job in Pharma that can actually cater to that. Like, it's actually crazy how many departments, how many different roles there are in Pharma, and it's only continuously growing, which is great. So I was in the preclinical side. I thought I loved research, and then I hated it because we went through this weird cycle of, hey, we're going to do research so we can get grant funding. And then with that grant funding, we're going to do more research. And then we're just going to keep doing this until we get published. And then once we get published, now we can get more grant funding. So I became part of this weird loophole that I just didn't want to be in. And what I learned about myself is I wanted to see the end game. If I'm doing all this research and I don't get to see what happens at the end. Granted, there's a lot of valuable publications. I'm not saying that there isn't, and there's a lot of medications and a lot of practices that happen through it. Not downplaying that in any way, shape, or form. But I wanted quicker response in terms of I want to see the impact that I made quicker. And so I've decided, okay, let me go to the opposite side. So I started doing clinical trial recruitment. So I was still at Brigham, started recruiting patients for clinical trials it's been so long now, for a couple of different medications. And I was like, okay, now I'm on this side, now I can see the patient and now see the effects of medicine and see how that goes, because I couldn't see that on the preclinical side. And then I realized, I was like, well, I'm doing recruitment and I'm seeing this, but I wasn't part of the decision process, like what you said about some of the design. I was like, this is done terribly, or some things like that, right? So I felt that I was cherry picking, and I was like, I actually don't like this. And so data science became more of an interest to me because I realized I could help with decision making. And in research for me and in the clinical trial recruitment for me, I wasn't making much of an impact on the decision making. And that's where I really wanted to focus myself on, because I want to have a better role, and personally more impactful role for me. Of course, other roles, depending on who you are more impactful, and that's fine. But I decided, you know what, I want to be able to help with the decision making, so data science became great for me because when I started in medical affairs and was transitioning to more of an analytics role, we were trying to pick clinical trial sites. And that was super cool to me because we used patient demographic data, we used different types of modeling, if you will, to determine, hey, this area is a high unmet need. And we were able to really create cool models that were then to say, okay, this hospital, this community center are the best clinical trial sites for these types of patients. And they actually became clinical trial sites. So I was able to see the impact of my work much quicker. Granted, this takes about a few years to happen, but within 2 years, I was able to see all the modeling and all the analytics work. We were able to see that change happen. So what my food for thought here is, I didn't know what I wanted to do in pharma, and even in pharma, I didn't know what I wanted to do, and that's okay, because I used some of those early experiences to help determine, okay, what is it really that I actually care about, and actually makes me want to get up and go to work in the morning, and that really helped quite a bit.
Thank you, Taz, and thank you guys. This was very insightful. Everybody has a little bit of a different story, as you can see, and it's very interesting, right? Like, all of us unlock different parts of either our preferences or our personalities even, and our interests, either before, after, and during. So I think that probably translates into a lot of career paths, but what I also appreciate, like you, Taz, is the diversity that exists within pharma. And you don't have to keep jumping ship, right? You can also remain where you really want to remain, and then work collaboratively across other departments as well. So it works both ways, which is great, I think. I want to ask one or two more questions, and then maybe the audience has questions too, but one or two things that I think is relevant for the folks here is either from your own CV, or when you're hiring someone, if that is applicable for your current career or job, what is it that you look for, or what was it that stood out within your own resume that spoke to the hiring manager, or when you are hiring, what do you think about as well? So maybe I can start this time because I keep putting other people on the spot. So because I now am in a hiring role, but maybe I can tell you both sides of it. When I was getting my first position, so other than within Pfizer, where they saw me every day, basically, right, 4 days a week, they knew me, I was jumping around, talking to people, showing up at meetings, so they knew me. So that obviously Pfizer had an insider look at who I was. So that might have been different. But when I decided 2 years later to go somewhere else, right? So what happened there was that I took that Pfizer position and I showed them that those 2 years that I spent at Pfizer was essentially as an associate director doing development, because I lived and breathed within Pfizer, doing everything that a director role would do. So I really was able to market that properly. That was extremely important. I also talked about my MPH, because people ask me, because I am an MD, right, so then our MPH becomes a secondary degree. But I did highlight it. I told them how I took clinical trial design, I took statistics, I took epi in that in that degree, and I threw in some organizational management. A lot of these were my electives, just to be clear, because I was doing health policy and management actually. So that was the different parts of my resume that I flagged. Then obviously I got my first position, and then I moved to Sanofi. Now I've been hiring a lot because I have a really large project. I have a couple of phase 3 trials. I have a new approval process coming up. So I have a few medical directors. One of them is standing there. So you can talk to her later. So I hired a few people in the last 4 or so years that I've been at Sanofi. What have I looked for? I may be a deviation from the norm, because for me, what the most important thing has been, historically speaking, is that the person coming in has some research experience. It doesn't necessarily have to be in pharma, because within academia, and Karen can speak to it more because she's probably doing it more on a day-to-day basis, you can still collaborate with pharma in academia. There is investigator-initiated trials. There's a lot of different ways. So I did look for that research understanding. I will say the most important thing for me on the soft skill side has been communication skills, presentation skills, and also just this some kind of intelligence spark that I look for, which sounds very subjective, I know, but I just gotta mention it, you know. So I've hired based off of that. When I do look for experience, which I don't always, I do sometimes, if the position is junior enough, I can take different types of experience. You know, I can take someone who has worked more in preclinical. It's like, you know what, now I want to do something else. But they do emanate that passion. So that is important to me. I am a tad pretentious, so I do look at where you did what, which companies, which schools, which what. But there's still a path forward. There's a lot of good schools, not just Harvard. No offense, Sheila, but I still look around for that kind of experience. And yes, we do require a presentation from the applicants. I will say that sometimes is a deal breaker. People don't realize that. If you mess that up, I'm like, this guy can't talk, or this girl can't talk, you know, so then you're out. So that has happened with 2 or 3 people. I'll be very, those people are not here today, so I can say that very frankly. So that can happen. So communication is extremely important in pharma. And it's not, I make room for personalities. I'm not talking about somebody who's just naturally quiet. That's okay, that can happen, you know? But it's that ability to explain yourself. Even if you are explaining yourself and you've rehearsed it and you have a script, it doesn't matter. But it's that ability to navigate, to pivot your thoughts. Those are extremely important. I am in development, so I do require advanced degrees, like a doctorate or PhD or something like that, but that's just the nature of the job. It's not like it's supposed to be exclusionary. But that's just how development is built, because it's so heavy on science, so you kind of just gravitate towards that. But let me go back to the panelists, and maybe Selma, like if you could, Karen can start. Karen can start.
So I'm not in a hiring position myself, but somebody else is. But maybe I'll give also some perspective as to perhaps how I pivoted, in part because I've done a little coaching with other physicians who want to get into pharma and maybe don't have that industry experience. I think it is about cleverly marketing yourself. As a clinician, it's very easy to get another job. It's so easy. You barely have to interview, and it's quite a simple process to apply to hospitals. For pharma, there's a lot of rejection, which can be very tough. It also requires significantly more time. For example, it took about a year for me to secure a role. And I also think a big part of it is completely changing your CV and the things that you're highlighting. In fact, my husband's in finance, and he was the one that completely changed things around. In fact, minimized some aspects that I would have maximized in terms of like sub-internships and, you know, fellowships or experiences from years ago I thought would be very important. He's like, no. So I think it is about marketing. What are the key things that will stand out to the hiring manager? And a lot of those actually are what Sana described. So I hadn't a lot of pharma industry experience, and many of the roles I was going for were medical director, so a little higher. But what I highlighted was whenever I was a sub-I, I sat on an IRB board, P&T, Pharmacy and Therapeutic Board for a hospital, deciding what medicines go on formulary. These little things, that all counts, and to me that's some industry experience, training of allied health professions for a pharma company, speaking engagements, advisory boards, especially where potentially you're at practice and you're starting to become a go-to or an advisor. Those were things that I tried to market, and so I deprioritized some aspects and then elevated those that I thought, oh, that's not that much, but then it became really crucial. And I think the other thing too, that meant a lot, particularly again where I was breaking in, so to speak, is your internal network. For me, and the first thing I would tell any clinicians who are thinking about it is start networking, go back and talk to people you've gone to med school with, those that you've done training with, get on LinkedIn, and you'll be surprised how many have moved into pharma, and that's who you start reaching out to, getting their advice, having a call, and again, it's just those few connections. That one or two connection can be the thing that leads you into getting that interview, and that's honestly what happened with me. It took a while, but I just met the right person who knew me, knew what I did, and again was able to kind of push my interview up to the front. But in terms of medical and what's looked for, it's actually quite diverse. So we have PharmDs, PhDs, postdocs, we have clinicians, but we have a huge range of degrees that can work in medical affairs. Many of the PharmDs will work in what we call medical science liaisons, so they're sort of in the field, living in a territory, say Massachusetts, and they are almost the front line for the physicians and clinicians going into the offices. But quite an array of degrees, and actually Sanofi is very inclusive. Some companies will only hire clinicians for medical director roles. Biogen and some of these other companies are very limited, and again, that's also something to be aware of. But others, Sanofi, very inclusive. PharmDs, APPRNs, PAs, so quite an array. And again, you may go in at an associate, but it's still a great development path. And again, then people can move into development and global and beyond. So a really, as I said, you may go in with not a huge amount, but it's getting that foot in, and then there's a huge development that you can go from there.
Oh man, I have so much to say. Okay, so just jumping off of that part, the networking, I want to emphasize that so much. Here's a fun fact about me. I have never gotten a job without networking. Every single position I've had was through someone I knew, or a random connection, or going out of my way to reach out to this person. And it became a numbers game. Literally, it's genuinely a numbers game. It's the more you do, and for those who know the stats, right? The more you do, the more likely that at least one or two hit, and genuine, that's that one or two might be enough. I can speak to both the being as an applicant and then also on the hiring side. And I use the same thing for my previous students as well, because they come from a variety of different places. And I think, healthcare is very vast, right? And you can be a clinician, you could be actually, in the regulatory side, you can be on the research side, you can be a nurse, you can be on the patient services side. There's so many different sides to pharma. And what I've noticed by going through so many resumes when hiring, especially for different roles, because I've actually been a part if I'm not directly hiring, I've been a part of the interview process and on the panel of me interviewing those individuals. And the people who made it are specifically those, like what you guys have said, that you market yourself well. Honestly, the resumes look all the same. Genuinely, they look all the same. And how you present yourself and having some of those soft skills about, this is who I am, this is what I love to do, here's some things I need to work on, but I'm excited to work on it. Here's are some faults that I know I'm gonna do better on. Things like that, having that confidence to be able to say those things and being upfront about it carries so much weight. And I would rather someone give me a great presentation through an interview than someone who checks off all the dots on the resume. Like, yep, you got all the right qualifications, you've done all the right things, yada, yada, yada. Because at the end of the day, we're responsible, we work very hard in pharma. we grind. So at the end of the day, can we hire people that can, one, get the work done, be a part of a great team? Because in pharma, you never do anything yourself, right? It is a collaboration across not just your team, but multiple departments, and you need different skill sets. You're gonna be put in different situations where, guess what, this person's very hard-headed. We gotta figure out how to negotiate certain things for budgeting, for specifically resources, and for maybe even HR. So those skill sets are actually really high up there, right? So for example, when I hire for analytics roles, they especially look all the same. I know how to code. I know here's some of my projects, here's what I do, and literally everything looks the same. But how you present yourself and how your resume looks to me actually matters so much. And my wife's in HR, and she's worked in biotech in HR, and I have a lot of connections in the HR side. And these recruiters and these hiring managers on that first level, I kid you not, 30 seconds to a minute. That's how long they look at your resume, especially for a lot of these rather entry to mid-level roles. On the higher roles, you might have a larger resume, it takes a little bit longer, those are a little different process. But for a good majority of these roles, these HR folks look at them for 30 seconds to a minute. How do you present yourself on a piece of paper well, and putting all of your qualifications in as much detail as you can is actually the wrong way to do it. Highlight what you think is how you're going to represent yourself at that company. And sometimes, hey, if this role doesn't make sense to put on this resume, take it out, save some space. There's so much HR involved in the hiring process that if you can make it easier for those people looking and going through your resumes, it actually has a crazy impact on you going to the next level. So that I've learned a lot about in the last 5 years. So highly recommend resume curation. Sometimes less is more. Actually, most of the time, less is more. Especially for a lot of roles that are either entry level or mid level. And then, so the crazy thing about pharma specifically is that there's technically two parts of the pharmaceutical industry. We have biotechs, and then we have pharmaceutical companies. And there's actually a small distinction between the two. Biotechs are actually a lot smaller, and they're kind of, what would you call it? Their expertise is really on something novel or specific, right? And they're trying to do something specifically for a specific disease area. It could be rare, it could be not, but they really are groundbreaking in their research, and they're trying to get that first drug or that second drug for this, we say indication a lot, that just means disease, to the forefront to be able to get it to patients. Pharmaceutical companies, they do the same. They're not saying there's no research, but there's a lot more, their bread and butter is manufacturing medicines. We have a lot more medicines that are just out there commercially available. Machine that builds medicines and pumps it out, right? And so depending on what you're looking for, and I highlight this often because if you're someone who's new and is wanting to dive into a role that has a bit more flexibility, I highly recommend biotech over pharma. You will have the ability to jump around, you'll be able to meet with a ton of more people because the companies are much smaller. The first company I worked for, I was the 100th employee, and I got to make the most fruitful connections because those people are now CEOs, chief business officers, chief scientific, and I was a regular associate. And so biotech has a lot of emphasis on growth and being able to look at different things. And I think if you're still curious about not knowing what you want to do, but you have some idea that this might be something, I really recommend biotech. I highly, highly recommend it. Not putting pharma, I'm in pharma right now, so not putting pharma aside, but if that is where you're at and you're unsure, definitely biotech is a place to go. But I have tons of other things, but
I think there is two different pathways that you can take. Like you're coming out of school and you're looking for your first job, or you have had different experiences and you're a clinician and you want to get into a different space. Maybe I'll talk to the first one because you guys have talked a lot about the other one, but I feel the same way in knowing, in not depending on how you have known that person is really important, because you'll get you won't take that much risk with someone you had no knowledge of, that has worked with, no one that you know, so I feel like the fact that going into internships or doing fellowships or development programs, they have a lot now into big pharmas, is really important, because you'll be able to see if you like it, that's first, but you'll also get to know people, and you'll also get maybe some mentors, and then those are the ones that are going to be helping you getting your first job, or getting a better understanding of the different environments that you have not seen within your internship. So that's my first point, and I think that's what has helped me a lot as well, because I got into Pharma through an internship. It's different programs in the US, but it's a year long. You get to have your own project, you have your own experience, and you get to also market yourself in a different way than just through an internship, because usually the internships you have one with the hiring manager, one with the HR, a panel to see a couple of people within the teams, but it's pretty short. You can be the best person possible for the job, but if you don't have the capacity of selling yourself as much because you're a more quiet person, or all of this, it can be a bit detrimental for you. So I feel showing off within your own project and within being part of the company is the best way that you can actually get in. That's my perspective. But then when you go up within the same company and you try to move on to one position to another, then having mentors and people that are going to be able to sell you maybe in the best way that you might not be able to is also very, very important. The job that I have today is much more closer to clinical, and I've had the opportunity to do it because I've been pushed by a couple of people that I worked with 5 years ago. So keeping those really good relationships are really important, and they will be able to push you through different or guide you. If you don't know what's going to be your next step, if you thought that you're going to be spending your whole life into marketing, but at some point having more digital or medical experience fits with your profile and how you want to evolve in the company, then you'll have people around you that will be able to support you and to guide you through it.
I wanted to see if the audience had any questions. There is a question in the back.
I can fly without flying.
All right, go ahead,
So,
project.
I'm Marcel, I'm a chief resident at the UAM department and doing the GI fellowship.
No, I can come with you.
Thank you. Hey, I'm Marcel. I am chief resident at BU and I'm going to be a GI fellow at MGH. I have two questions. The first one is, there's a lot of clinicians that likes to get into pharma, and they ask a lot, what type of activities within during fellowship or residency they can do to get exposed, which skill sets could be used or they can gain during training to transition. And my second question is towards IMG and IMG myself, and I support others IMGs that try to come to the US, and some of them are not interested in having doing a residency, and they're like, oh, can I find a job in pharma? Can I get into an internship in pharma? And when I come into those questions, so if any of you can give any insight on that.
All right. I'll start because Karen's standing, but Karen can grab the mic in the meanwhile. So I am a pharm grad as well. I think Karen qualified as herself as one as well, so you're in luck. In my particular case, I did want to do residency like yourself, and I wanted to do that. I will tell you, once you do residency in the US, you're on equal footing. At least for me, that's how it worked out. Within my training, residency and fellowship, the things that were important and worked in my favor was the fact that I was involved in different types of clinical trials. So that did help. I had a number of trials. I was only in fellowship, but I was a sub-I or an examining neurologist in a bunch of them. So that did stand out on my resume, was something that people noticed. In my particular case, because I decided to transition early, what did help me was the fact that I did that Pfizer program, because it was the first job that I did after my fellowship. So it was the first thing. There is another fellowship, and again, my bias is towards neurology and to some extent psychiatry. There is a Biogen fellowship that is also conducted at Mass General, and Katie can speak to that because she did that program as well. So there's programs like that exist that worked for me. The other thing is that if you have spent a few years in academia, I have hired at least 2 or 3 people that were like doing academic work, and I hired them without, Katie obviously had some experience, but they didn't have like straight pharma experience, but they had research experience. They had done different types of trial, or they, even preclinical, some folks run labs. It's not essential, but that is another type of experience that can work in your favor, and it might even, it may be a bias towards earlier development, like before phase 2, but that might be the right thing for someone as well, right? It's not I just live in a different space, and that's a very interesting space as well. So those were the types of things that worked. Whether if somebody comes from a different country and they've done their training there, I have personally not hired anyone like that, but I think it may depend a little bit on which country, unfortunately, where they got their clinical training in, how many years, if they have done research there. And I think that maybe Karen can add, because sometimes other things help in medical affairs, like being on speaker boards or interacting with a pharma company in a different space. And maybe Karen, you can come back to.
Yeah. I've worked quite a bit with ECFMG and international medical graduates. So I think there's a huge advantage as an international graduate if you can do a residency and fellowship here. In particular, some people say, can I just leave before residency? But there's definitely pros to that specializing. With that being said, I know a few international medical graduates who work in Sanofi in development on the earlier side. So one from Spain, practiced in Spain, one from China, and practiced there. What they did was then they came and worked in a lab in the US and then moved into pharma. So by all means, I think you can do it. You don't have to go back and do training to become a physician, or to get the specialty here. And so that's in the development side, where it can be extremely valuable, because again they bring that real world experience from working. It can depend too, as Sally mentioned, on the country. And we mentioned this before, but again, any opportunity you can do to be a sub-I in a trial, if again you're under fellowship. Another thing which I didn't mention, and again it might depend as an international graduate, because I was on a H1, then you have to wait for a green card. But if some are US residents, and so there are opportunities with CROs clinical research organizations. So for example, when I was in that year where I was getting rejections and so forth, I got an opportunity again through networking to do some pharmacovigilance with one of these CROs on some of their neurology trials, just as a consulting basis. And so there can be opportunities there, especially you know, on a short-term basis where you just get your foot in the door. Other things that you can do, which is kind of low-hanging fruit, but good clinical practice, GCP, you know, simple, but all these little things I think count. And like I said, if you have opportunities to serve on a board, an IRB, if you know, there may be things like that you can get a chance to do during fellowship, and you know, in those first year or two of work.
Are there any other questions?
Yeah, I had a question on like the data science, AI kind of like hiring side of things. Is like not having a master's a deal breaker, or can like work experience kind of like balance things out a bit?
You know, that's a great question. You do not need a master's. So I will say this, degrees never hurt. They will only help, right? At least on the analytics side, it also depends on where you're looking in terms of which department, because there's actually quite a few different places within pharma and biotech where data science can actually live in. And nowadays, there's data science teams that are responsible for a lot of different departments. And unlike the medical directed departments, there's a little bit more leeway in terms of qualifications for analytics. To be honest with you, I have hired people when I had to compare a couple of candidates, strong candidates, people who didn't have that master's versus someone who did. So it really depends on, can you present yourself well, even through the resume, that hey, these are the projects I've done, this is the experience I'm willing to bring. And if that can be at the forefront of what you talk about, what you present yourself as, it can 100%, you know, potentially beat out a degree. Again, pharma is still very focused on having degrees. That's just the nature of the industry. But at least on the analytics world that I can talk about, it's a little bit more on the tech side, right? So the tech industry, a lot of people don't have degrees, but they're very skilled and can do what they want. So on the pharma side, we're trying to bring in a lot more internal talent. When I say that, we're used to bringing vendors in to do a lot of our analytics and do everything across the board. We're now focusing on bringing in talent from those tech places, or even outside of that, to be honest with you, to come in and help us get insights, do analytics for us. And a lot of them don't have masters. I can definitely say that for sure.
Maybe one last question if there is, and then.
Hi, I'm Wani. I'll ask my question first and I'll also introduce a little bit about myself. My question is, are there any informatics role in clinical development? So to substantiate the question a little bit, I'm a neurologist. I work at South Shore part-time. I thank you so much for organizing this. This is really a great opportunity for me to learn. I have no experience in pharma, but I did a lot of these experiences resonated with me. I had my medical degree from Singapore. I did a few years of training there. I redid my training here. And then I did a master's in Detroit where I did my first residency, and now I'm doing a second master in informatics. So a lot of people might say that I'm a little confused too. I'm still in discovery mode too, but I know that I'm still interested in patient care. That's something that I know that I will never let go of. But I've always been interested in research, and LLM is something that is new and something that I need to gain skill in. That's why I do this master's. But I find myself having difficulty finding roles when I am applying for jobs to integrate both, if that makes sense. When I'm trying to find roles in data, I feel like I don't have enough experience for data architecture and things like that. I don't have in-depth computer science experience. I can do like some coding to make sense of data, but not good enough to drive the whole process. I'm still interested in clinical development too, but I don't know if there's any roles that allows me to do both of them.
Maybe I go first because my response might be shorter. It's interesting what you described. I'll tell you this, that when I was at Pfizer, the department that I started in, that held that fellowship I mentioned, was computational neuroscience. They went into a number of iterations of their name, but that's where they ended up right before I left. And what they had was a mix of actual computer scientists, data scientists, people that really love the statistics and the coding and all that, and were really, really experts of that world. But then they had a bunch of neurologists or psychiatrists, and we were that translational role. And of course, we were fellows, but they were then hiring from those folks. There was a guy that was a psychiatrist, but had an MS in informatics as well, actually. That's why I mentioned that. So so I think there is a role for, in some companies, Biogen also has something like that. I do think it still exists. So there's that translational role where they want physicians to translate the data science and speak to the development people and speak to the medical affairs people. Not in every company, mind you, and these are the two I know of. There might be others. I don't know how they play in Takeda, but it's possible that there are others. Sanofi, I haven't seen it, but there are that type of space that exists, that's at the cusp of both of these places. And I'll give you the contact of one person who couldn't come in today. She's an orthopedic surgeon, worked in preclinical development, and now she's in clinical development, and she also dabbled in precision health. So she has an array of experiences, and she's worked around, and she just couldn't unfortunately make it today. But that might be another person who can, kind of help you more. But let me ask Imtiaz to add, because he is in that space right now.
Yeah, so again, so two things. One, the roles we were talking about where, you might see a lot of like, hey, know the architect, and I need to know data engineering, need to know data architecture. I would say for your specific use case, because you are a physician, right? And that those types of roles might not be most catered to because it is very hardcore data science and data engineering or whatever that title may be. And those might not be the best fit for you if you want to continue being on the patient side specifically, like being more so catering to your background, right? There are plenty of roles, and perfect with that. There's a lot of translational roles that I believe. And there's also a big department that's been growing in the last few years. Digital health is huge for having people with a lot of medical background, but also know at least digitally and also on the informatics side. So at my first biotech company, actually I forgot to mention this, but when I transitioned into the data science world, we had a small digital health team of 3 people, me being one of them. And it was very cool because I was about to work with physicians who actually knew and cared a lot about the numbers, which was really nice because they catered a lot more to the epidemiology of certain things and how digital health applications, whether or not they're clinically validated or not, were impacted or helped, specifically patients to get into better care or better health outcomes, right? And so they had a lot of informatics experience, but they would never call themselves a data scientist. So I would say that to me would be that was immediately the first thing that popped up. There is, like you said, more translation roles, and I do believe you will see more roles like this pop up where like, hey, we want someone who can tell us if the data is, how do I say this right? Especially in clinical, I think you will, and even in the clinical ops side as well, there's so much happening in terms of integrating medical devices, digital health into clinical trials, and so on and so forth, and that requires a bit of acumen on the data side. And that's only continuously growing because as we become a more digital world, as we are now, and now with AI becoming the forefront of everything apparently, with a lot of agents being developed and apps and so on and so forth, that's slightly separate, but people need to be more nuanced in some of that, and so there is a appetite for someone like you, who definitely would be like, hey, I know the medical and I have a bit of informatics experience. You can definitely find roles like that. They're not as many, but I would definitely say one of the big things would be digital health, for sure.
Okay, one last question, and then I just wanted to leave time for networking. So one last question.
Thank you. Sana, I have a question between you and Salma. So first of all, thank you all for coming on Sunday. So Sana, you mentioned that you're in the hiring role as well, and diversity is an important factor. Within clinical development, what kind of background are you seeking in terms of, as you said, degrees are important, but what kind of, like, for example, I come from HEOR, somewhere between you and Salma. What do you guys think about me having a little bit of industry background, consulting, academia? How do you consider those candidates? And if you can give some advice on people who've been in the academia now and try to getting back into pharma, what networking, like Vikas was mentioning, would be useful? What kind of networking we should be doing to be able to get to that stage?
Maybe I can start, and I'll hand it over to Selma as well. So in my particular case, we're in an extremely fast-paced project. I do make room for people with a diversity of experiences, but within that diversity, I am looking for more very hardcore science. Like I have looked at like projects done within the hospital. If, for instance, they have designed major trials within the hospital, or they have worked with other companies, which was a lot of experience that Katie had, and have sat on different advisory boards or steering committees. So I definitely have room for academic experience, but that was the type of experience that I sought out. When I have hired PhDs, I have hired PhDs that have done clinical trial work, and I have brought in, that was a slightly junior role, but recently I'm bringing in a person who's done more preclinical, but like Imtiaz mentioned, he lived in a biotech for 2 years and jumped around and did a lot of other things. So that translated into him being, versatile enough to like jump into my team now. So it depends a little bit on the position. But for like the medical director role, I have been very much looking into the hardcore science type of background. It doesn't have to be in a lab, but it has to have touched clinical trials of some sort. Not even if it wasn't a pharmaceutical trial, a trial that they did, a trial that they thought about, or a trial that they conducted between different centers, or they did like a data registry of different sorts. So I do look for that kind of thinking. But maybe Selma, you can talk about.
Yeah. So within my role today, it's like being in the middle of like 10 other teams that are actually like, how can I say that? Like early commercial, we're not generating any revenues. We're trying to anticipate what's going to take for us to have a successful launch when we're actually launching. So we work a lot with the clinical that we try to like push to the ambition because there is everything that is done everything that is discussed within the clinical trials, every insights that we get from like our HIVA counterparts or our medical ones are going to have an impact when we launch. So the amount of data that we'll be able to, clinical data that we'll be able to share is going to be coming from the clinical team that would have been worked on before on it. So I think it's a very like diverse role because you get to work with a lot of different people and you have much more of an influencer role rather than actually doing, because you cannot really have like a hand or a say into what is the medical strategy because it's owned by medical and the MSLs are leading it within the field. But what they're doing today at this point is also going to have an impact on what's going to be the communication and the strategy for the sales teams when they're going to be having one. So to your question, I think that's at least what I'm valuing into like when I'm hiring someone today is to have an understanding of what's launch strategy, to be able to anticipate what is going to be needed at that time. And having people who have actually launched product, it doesn't have to be in the US, it doesn't have to be in an English-speaking like country or any, but it has to be in an affiliate, because having the understanding of what a marketing campaign is, or how are we working with medical teams in the field, is important for me, so we can anticipate what needs to be done before. And so there is this, and there is also a lot of people coming for consultancies. I feel like the strategy, like we have a bunch of saying like we're outsourcing a lot, but we are actually. But it's super interesting because they have this understanding of what's like a marketing strategy, a commercial strategy, and where do we need to be challenging the people around as well. So we challenge the clinical team, but we challenge a lot as well on the market access team, because the discussion that they have, and especially in the US, that's super important, the discussion that they have with the payers and like how can we support the value of the product that we're working on. It needs to be taken into account like their issues, but it needs to be ambitious, and we need to be able to take risks to have like a good launch when it comes to it.
Thanks, Alma. So I think we should leave a little bit of time for networking, and during that, Ibrahim, you'll find out what networking helps. But just to close off, and I won't do the round table, I'll just close off because I heard everybody. So I think that there were a few things that we learned today. Diversity, how it still remains important, and diversity of thought, diversity of experiences, of degrees, of all sorts of people. The discovery part, discovering yourself, discovering the industry, giving yourself the permission to discover constantly and pivot. And just to make it 3Ds, I think the commercial people are rubbing on me, the Disneyland of opportunity. So there is a lot of opportunity. There is a lot of different things you could do. For me, at least, that was what really opened it up to me. And with that, I will just say that you're here to network, meet everybody. I put the signs up. It's not so that you stay in your place. It's to move around. There are different specialties. There's also clinical operations. I forgot to write that down. That's my bad. But we have someone from there. The other thing is we have coffee and we have chai. It's not chai tea. It's chai because they mean the same thing. So it's chai, it's courtesy of Imtiaz. If you like it, you can, talk to him about, catering your events. I'm telling you, he's very diverse. And we also have some snacks. So please dig in, because I hope we're able to finish them. So thank you all for coming. Please stick around for the networking, and thank you for the very engaging conversation. And yes, let's get the networking started.